Good morning.
Morning. That is a nice cat, Aaron.
Thank you. His name's Hershey, and he dies for attention. So constantly on me, unfortunately, or fortunately, you might say.
Is it a Siamese or a Persian? I forget what.
I don't know what type specifically. It's my friend's cat, but yeah, he's long hair, kind of annoying because it's shedding all over the place all the time. But
Well, welcome to the meeting.
Hey everyone. Looks like we haven't had a trickle of people in for the last minute, so I think we should get started. Welcome everyone. Good to see you all again. As a reminder, please register your attendance in the meeting notes doc, which are just pasted in the chat. Or as always, you go to salsa.dev/notes for a link. Also, a reminder to follow the SLSA framework's code of conduct, and there's a link in the meeting notes for that. First, if welcome anyone who's new who'd like to briefly say hello.
Hi everyone, I'm Tianyu. I'm going to work with Mark on the source aspect going forward.
Hello, my name is Matt Farina. I'm interested in some of the latest changes in the salsa spec that everyone seemed to learn about in the last week.
Hey Tiana and Matt, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I think that's, looking at the list, I think that's everybody. As always, if you have any agenda items, please go ahead and add them to the meeting notes. I put a couple pull requests to highlight for review. They're basically last minute changes for the spec, but that I think are worth considering, but that really do need some community feedback. The first one is pull request 810. These are all linked in the meeting notes. Andrew has put together a pull request to unify on the term build platform, because previously we kind of say, sometimes we say platform, sometimes we say system, sometimes we say service, which has led to a lot of confusion, and we've had a lot of feedback about that. In my opinion, I think it helps a lot. but it's valuable to get feedback on whether that makes sense. And in particular, the one biggest change, it's a terminology change, but we're renaming the one requirement from build service to hosted, because basically we're just eliminating service. So it's like one fewer term to have to define. I guess I'll just briefly mention these three things and see if anyone else has anything, and then we could discuss as needed, or else people could just comment on the issue. Here, I guess in case it's helpful. I think most people have the meeting notes open, so you can see what we're talking about. The other one is, which came up during that pull request, is in the provenance schema. We currently have a field called system parameters. We have an external parameters and system parameters. Because that pull request is basically eliminating the word system, that's how we kind of noticed this. The question is, should we rename it to internal parameters, or perhaps trusted parameters, or something else? To A, eliminate the word system, and B, have a comparison to external. That way there's external parameters and internal parameters. So far, like I think Andrew, Tom, and I have mentioned that, have said it seems valuable, but the question is like how this agrees with our release candidate process. Like, can we make such a change this late in the game? And the third change is pull request 816, around kind of explaining the need to define a security model for a build platform. It's kind of implicit in how you generate provenance, but it's adding text to actually explicitly say, you define something external and internal, et cetera. I think those are the three outstanding ones that are worth discussing. Andrew, did I capture that correctly?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. The one about the build platform is a gigantic PR, and I do apologize for that. There's not really a better way to make that big of a change. But I think Mark did a good job of catching the things that I didn't catch, which were also outside of the scope of the changes. So I think that at this point in time, I feel reasonably comfortable that we can just keep it to the parts that are changed. We don't have to do too much investigation outside. And in that, I did also add something to the FAQ so that readers would be aware of our unification on the concept of a platform.
Aaron?
Yeah, I was going to comment, based on kind of your prompts, Mark, right around like, does this line up with a release candidate? Do we need to essentially wait? Which seems odd, if this is an improvement, unless it's like truly breaking the release candidate process. I mean, wouldn't we naturally just merge these PRs in anyway after we're at 1.0? So it's just an interesting extra question to put out there. I bet Arno would have a comment on that.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think if it's just terminology, we can kind of say, hey, it's just, you call one thing for another, but fundamentally, we're not changing the requirements. I think we could get away with it. We just, like I said, changing terminology. If you implemented thinking, hey, I'm doing build service, and now we say no, we call it build platform, it really doesn't change what you're doing. Your implementation would be exactly the same. So maybe you change your documentation, but it doesn't break anything. So I think that one, actually we can get away with this one saying it's editorial.
Yeah, and just to jump in, sorry to not have my hand raised, but within the dialogue, it might be the best time ever if we're changing this, terminology to do it before it's 1.0, because it might be more of a rug pull if we do it later. So
And to me, I also hear what Arno is saying about it's just terminology and that being applicable for 815 as well, because nobody would ideally, or probably nobody would have done any implementation towards the provenance specification v1. And so there's nothing that's being changed, just a modification in the key. So to me, I feel like that falls in the same justification. I know it. Well, I can see based on your reaction, you don't agree, but I think that it's just a nod towards clarification of terminology. It's a change from 0.1, but in essence, there's not anything that's changing.
So let's be clear on what we're talking about. The 810, I think we agree. The change of name, like if we change system parameters to internal parameters to, I think this breaks code. If you have, if you have an implementation where today it reads system parameters, we change this, you have to change your code. By definition, this cannot be considered editorial. Now, I mean, we can pinch our nose and claim that, hey, this is purely editorial. And the reality is, you might be right. Maybe there's no implementation where you to actually break and nobody's going to come and sue us. But, if we want to be strict with the process, this is clearly not editorial in nature.
I guess, yeah, I agree that it's not editorial. On the other hand, if we have something that we like, if there's not agreement that it's an improvement, that's one thing. But if there's universal agreement that this new field name is strictly better and everyone thinks it's much clearer and leads to less confusion, so like we would want to do it. But once we do 1.0, we really can't without bumping up to a 2.0 and breaking in everyone. But we have a chance to do it now. Should we? And also in terms of the governance, I guess it depends on how you interpret the doc. The governance doc isn't super specific. It says that we need to send out a release candidate or a candidate for an approved specification to get approval. I think it's almost kind of written in the model of like, you do one draft, get that approved, and then that thing doesn't get touched until like the next version in a year or two, and there's absolutely no changes in between. So I don't think it specifically says what gets approved and what's not. So I could see it on both sides. That's why I wanted to raise it.
No, so let me talk a little bit more about the from the governance, the community specification license framework point of view. The 2-week period, has to do with intellectual property. And so from that point of view, I don't think there's a difference. If you call it, take all of this with a grain of salt. I'm not a lawyer. I don't claim to be, right? But I have spent a lot of time on these kind of issues, patent policies and whatnot. So I am at least an educated engineer on that front. And my understanding of what this is about is, if somebody had some patent, that would read on the spec on this particular feature, and we're changing it. Now, we're infringing on some patents different than others. It may have some legal implication with regard to licensing commitment made by contributors and so on. So I'm not going to get into more details, but this is essentially what this kind of stuff hinges on. In this case, I would think, it's pretty clear that, changing the name of parameter is not going to make you infringe on a patent more than other or anything like this. So there's no impact from that point of view. I think, it's pretty clear. I can't imagine the lawyer claiming otherwise.
I think that our options are don't change it now and have a lot of pain in a year versus change it now and wait another X amount of time, or just do it now. So those are the three options that I see.
My kind of feeling is that I'm not sure, unless we're making a bunch of other breaking changes later, I don't think I would rise this to do a breaking change for this to be the only one. So it might be like either we do this now or we just live with the current name. I'm sorry, Arno, you were about to say something.
No, but you're right. I agree with that. I mean, just to be clear, I agree with what was just said. The cleanest option, if we really want to play by the book and have no issue, is to have an RC3, and we could have it today, land the PRs, and say, okay, RC3, wait 2 weeks, and have the approved spec then. In reality, as I'm a fairly pragmatic guy. I'm not religious about this kind of stuff. And again, I don't think anybody's going to come and sue us. I mean, not literally, but even like, intellectually. So I'm okay if we said, hey, it's not completely by the book, but and I agree that, it's better to fix it now than after 1.0. There's no doubt. I think nobody's going to argue against that. So.
Yeah, I was just going to add that pulling the Band-Aid now, so to speak, is probably the best option. Having said that, I also want to raise Aaron's question here in case it wasn't already. Is anyone aware of an implementation based on RC2?
So I'm not aware of anybody who's implementing, and I think there's a few folks who posted in there about no implementation. I know that a lot of open source projects are trying to see like when is this thing more or less finished so that we could start doing that work. I know some folks have been looking at v1.0 of the Provenance spec and some other things. There's some build tools that are trying to keep track of what's going on. They want to know when it's done so that they can I would say finish implementing. I know that some folks are like, they're not, they don't plan to release an implementation of any of the RCs. They just plan to say, hey, if this is more or less what it's going to look like, let's start the work now so that we're, ready around the time 1.0 officially releases.
And I was going to jump in, Mike. I think that's a really good point, right? Like maybe this is like an 80-20 rule where they've already implemented or prepared 80% of it and they're waiting for us to break something, right? Like you kind of alluded, they don't want to do a full. So I wonder for their sake, if we make this, breaking change, can we make sure it's very much noted, right, for those folks? That'd probably be the best political move for us.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We have to be transparent and try to make sure people are aware. I mean, the reality is, if somebody's working implementation, they are going to wait for 1.0 to be out really final to say, okay, now we can release our code. And if they have one parameter name to change, it's not going to take them weeks to fix their code, right? So again, I mean, it's a very minor change. Even though it breaks their code, they have to do something. It's not nothing. It's still very minimal, and they can very quickly get the code up to date. It's not like we're changing like some logic that would require redesigning a whole bunch of things. So I agree with that.
I guess let me ask, because one thing we didn't explicitly talk about, do folks think this is a good change, right? Because like all this is assuming that it is like a pretty big improvement. I just want to make sure that there is consensus that it actually is a worthwhile improvement. Does anyone not think it is? Because that would be valuable to know, like an argument that like it's good enough.
I'm technically neutral. but I don't think it's a negative change.
So are you talking about the parameters name in
Yeah,
particular?
the name changing system parameters to internal parameters.
And I was going to ask which one, because there were two put to, before. So I was like, so the proposal is internal, right?
Yeah, I think there's been more. I think the proposal is internal. An alternative would be trusted parameters if folks speak up to say that they think that one is better. I think so.
That's why I'm raising it, because we might as well explicitly raise that as a question so we get a clear direction from the group. Chris, go ahead.
I wouldn't like, I would be against choosing trusted parameters if it's with external parameters, but if we did trusted and untrusted, I would personally find that clearer than internal, external.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. My inclination would be to keep the external and say internal, because kind of trusted raises a question of like what's trusted, what's not. Although we do talk about that later. It seems like external has resonated with people, and that's what has gotten the most reviews. So my inclination would be to mirror that.
I agree. That's another argument in favor of, it also minimizes the number of changes. So, the smaller it is, the better.
Just to throw a verbal comment, I kind of bend towards the internal, external, because it's more of like a fact-based attribute, because trust is a little tricky to define, I suppose. So.
Okay, that sounds good. Sounds like no one was in favor of trusted, untrusted. Okay, so it sounds like doing it now, no one has strong objections to it. Actually, let me ask you that. I propose that we make this change, send out the pull request today, and then do maybe like reach out to, I did a code search. I posted it in the meeting notes. It looks like there's a couple of implementations against RC1. I propose that we make this change even though it's past the RC period, because we have like enough folks in this room that think it's worth it while. Any objections? Okay, great. Oh, Chris?
I see that Jay White noted in the chat fear that there will be a loss of trust in the spec if we don't act fast enough. I was wondering if they wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as somebody who's used specs in the past, right? I mean, we all have. If I touch a spec, or if I'm looking at these RCs and I'm saying, okay, I'm raring to go, and I'm prepping all my whole systems, I'm prepping everything for it, and all of a sudden I get hit with a change after V1 comes out, and I've done all this work to prep, and I get hit with this kind of change, I got to go back then and do something else. I'm going to say, you know what? Throw my hands up, especially when I'm in a situation where I'm like, throw my hands up, find something that's a little bit more stable. If we do things that too late, I believe we should just do this now. Like somebody said, tear the Band-Aid, do it now, because to do it later on, you could potentially run into a situation where somebody's going to say, well, maybe I need to wait a little longer until it's more stable. I mean, and that's the only thing I say with that. Tear the Band-Aid, do it now.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, we'll make the change now. If anyone wants to volunteer to do it, I think just go ahead and take that issue. If not, I will as a fallback, but anyone else, please go right ahead. And so the changes I think would be to change both the SLSA repo. We also have the two example build type definitions. So it would be to change those as well. And if it might be worthwhile to reach out to a couple folks, like I know, for example, NPM. Well, actually, I think NPM has been working on SLSA provenance tooling, but I don't think they started with 1.0 yet anyway, so that they shouldn't change. There's the SLSA verifier and SLSA GitHub generator within the SLSA framework org. I think we could make those separately, I don't think that, you know, obviously we can't do one pull request that touches multiple repos, but I think those are like the biggest users, and I think that they're fine changing, knowing that change.
I mean, the reality is we cannot possibly know what's out there, right? I mean, there may be plenty of,
yeah, of course,
implementations in the works that we don't know, and people are going to be like, oh, why, what? Yeah. Right? So we just need to be sure that when we release 1.0, this is as you know, highlighted clearly, as it was said before, because we don't want people to, you know, not notice it. We publish 1.0, they go out with their code, and then they realize somewhere down the line it's not compatible with other software because we have actually made a change they didn't realize we had in 1.0. That's the only real danger. So we have to be careful there.
Sounds good. Okay, any more topics on that? I propose that we discuss on the GitHub issue. Okay, and so in terms of pull request, any more reviews or eyeballs on the two outstanding pull requests we have, 8.10 and 8.16 would be valuable as well. Anything more on the topic?
I'm wondering whether we should put a note in the RC2 spec that's already published. The warning kind of thing, say, watch out, this is about to change. So if somebody is actually going to RC2 today and they're at least they would have heads up, you know. I mean, we have the advantages, we have the control of the document. Might as well.
Yeah, I see no harm in that. I think that's a good idea. Okay. In other news in the 1.0 release, I'm working now on a what's new page, which was kind of a long outstanding issue. I'm basically taking the release candidate 1 announcement that we had and just updating it with changes since then, and just kind of fixing up and expanding on that a bit. And so I'm hoping to send that out today or tomorrow morning. The plan that I think Arno had posted in Slack. Do you want to talk about that, Arno?
Yeah, I actually don't know if I posted to the public channel. I talked to several people in different, so I apologize. I lost track where I said what, but I mean, no, I know what it is, the what I know. So let me make sure everybody knows. So since the target date is April 19th, and we have a 2-week period between RC2 and the release of the approved spec 1.0, it will be actually April 18th will be 2 weeks exactly after. And so we have a meeting on April 17th. So I figured, well, we can, you know, make it a decision on the 17th during a call that, assuming, the sky doesn't fall between the day and the next day, we would publish the 1.0 on April 18th. And then there's OpenSSF is geared up to publish a press release on the 19th. And so that would work well for them because they can schedule the press release and we can just say, yep, it's out. We have a short period between the press release and the actual publication coming the night before, essentially. And so we just have to agree on the 17th. Yeah, if nothing wrong happens within 24 hours, in 24 hours, we publish 1.0. And assuming that nobody comes out of the woodwork and say, wait, stop the press. And then if it does, it does. And then we have to deal with it. We have to delay everything. But, assuming nothing bad happens that lasts 24 hours, we have our plan set and we can just roll.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I personally think this is a good idea, especially since all the other ones that we've done have taken like a couple days to get through, because there's just like the lag time of getting approvals and reviews. So I think this is a really good idea.
And by the way, I think it might be worth mentioning to people that technically is in the repo, we've been working 1.0, keeping the 1.0 directory as the draft. And so that will then become the approved spec, RC1 and RC2 being parallel directories in the repositories. So those will be retired and they will be marked as retired, but so the 1.0 will become the approved spec. Jay, are you trying to talk? Can't hear you.
Oh, no, none at all.
Okay. You're off mute, that's why I was. No problem.
All right, sounds good. And then just because we talk about every meeting, at some point in the future, we'll get a better version control system that's not making directory copies. Okay. I think the last topic Matt brought up, issue 802. Matt, would you like to introduce it?
Yes, hello, thank you. And thank you for having me. This is my first time coming to one of your meetings. And so as it may happen sometimes, somebody crashes with something that caught their attention or a concern or something when I talk about. And that's kind of one of those things that I have here today. There were a number of us who've slightly been paying attention to SLSA at a distance and knew what the 0.1 spec entailed, but hadn't been paying a lot of attention to the work since then. And some of the changes in the 1.0 and some of the things that were even pulled out and shifted around conceptually caught a number of people off guard. I was one of them, but I thought, hey, let me check myself before I come to you guys. And so I started asking around with a number of folks at some various companies who deal with security and build systems and things like that to check myself before I came and started posting issues. And that's what led me ultimately here. And one of the things that I know is that your build system matters a lot, right? There's a big variation between an insecure system, right? System where somebody is running some build system and every node has, root and QWERTY as its username and password, and everyone in the company can get in, versus one that's handled very well from an operational security standpoint. And the SLSA.1 had things like the common rules at level 4. Now I know the new SLSA spec with the build levels doesn't have level 4. It's one of those things you're talking about in the future. But when you looked at it before, it took that build security into account and made it something that people could see at a glance. And that's one of those things that I realize everybody looks for badges at a glance, right? When I go and I do something with Go, I can go see the Go report card. What level, what grade did it get, right? little bit of a gamification there, but people like these at a glance things. And build systems has kind of been turned into a self-evaluation where people need to go out and then self-evaluate, and it's been taken out of it. And so there is no at a glance. Now, that does two things I realize in my mind off the top of my head is people who are looking for at a glance to see how secure is this thing built no longer have that at a glance view that relates to the build system. And it also doesn't help gamify and privilege people who have really strong build systems from being able to show that off, which I think is a really important aspect, because with a lot of these services, you have no idea. You're just guessing at the quality of the company, and being able to learn some of this, show it off. And so the issue that I filed was to add kind of a build systems track. It was my first shot at an idea of trying to provide something here as a getting started. And I wanted to show up and just first see if you understand where I'm coming from and what you all think about this space and this problem. And I did read your explanation of why you shifted things around beforehand. So that's my take on it. And I'll shut up now.
Yeah, thanks. This is, I think, super helpful. I think this is like the type of really good feedback and critical look that we need. A first question, do you think this is something that we can add later, or does it make 1.0 like unworkable? Because the basic model for 1.0 is that we're trying to define like the subset of 0.1 that we have broad agreement on and that is stable, and when we think like the things that are kind of both necessary but also that we have agreement on, and we didn't yet have agreement on any of like the common pieces, which is why we didn't kind of include it. Do you think that like a 1. It's okay to do it in 1.0 and just like noting that gap in 0.1 is all right, or are you more thinking that like this is like a kind of a roadblock?
If you had level 4 still in there, I would have probably said it was a roadblock. But because level 4, which is where these requirements came in 0.1, is kind of been pushed to future work, I don't think that it is so much a blocker. I would like to see it noted in the future direction. And when you go out with your announcement, I think explaining, that we took this highest level that had some kind of nebulous parts to it and we didn't get broad agreement on it. So that's coming, but we wanted to get something out first. We're pushing this off to the future. I think communicating that clearly for people would be helpful, because there are a number of places where people said, we've got out level 4 nailed. And, even though they met the nebulous requirements, they said, we've got level 4 nailed. And now you're saying, we don't have level 4 anymore. And I think providing an explanation of what's going on and the direction around that space would be useful for those folks who were both looking for it and producing it already, because you've now taken that away. And so that's kind of there. But because it was at that level 4, you put into future work, I don't think it's a blocker, because it fits into that. Now, I would like to see level 4 get worked out, because I think that's going to be a nice level of separation. And I like both the gamification of it, of getting people to build more secure things, and people being able to see that. So I'd like to see us get there, but I don't see it as a blocker, if that makes sense.
So yeah, I think, so I have a couple of questions for you, but I also wanted to just kind of throw some stuff out there, because I think one of the reasons why we had removed level 4 and some of the specific things around common requirements was around it being unclear exactly, because I know a lot of folks were claiming, for example, level 4, and their write-ups, you're like, well, maybe it's level 4, we're not sure. And so we wanted to kind of also figure out, like, how can we make that clearer so that there's less of this ambiguity? Because there's lots of folks who are claiming, lots of things. And I think the thing is that we found is, at least compared to like your average scorecard or similar sort of linting tool that can kind of gamify some of these things, when you start to look at a build service and all of its complexities, it's a little bit more difficult to sort of, it requires a significant amount of data around, how are you configuring the build system? How have you secured it? What is the infrastructure you're running on? Who has authorization for that infrastructure, and so on. And that's kind of where some of the stuff that we've been doing with stuff like the SLSA conformance program as well kind of come in. So I think, to throw something back to you, it's I think we'd be interested to know, like, what sorts of things would you want to see in that sort of gamification that somebody could, and who would be the one, let's say, attesting to that, right? Who would be the one coming in and saying, yes, you are, saying that, you run a lockdown control plane and this, that, and the other thing. And therefore you're hitting the SLSA level 4 whatever, some high level requirement there.
Yeah, that gets tricky because you're talking about who attests to it. I do like the idea of a third party always doing the attesting. We went in, we reviewed this. It's the kind of thing that you get with so many other places, because companies like to inflate themselves to look better. And I personally would like somebody to have a more critical eye on it. And so, I mean, if you had something like levels, right? And you see this in some of the other things. So like at SUSE, where I'm at, we have, for a number of things, had to do things like common criteria. And common criteria actually gets into, here's the levels of things you have to have around the controls you have, and then you get audited and all of that. And so you can get those certifications for certain types of builds. And so some of this has been worked out in other areas, though they don't have the branding and prominence worldwide. Like common criteria is fairly popular in certain circles in Europe, but it doesn't have the whole worldwide thing. And so some of this has been worked out, and I would probably look to those to see what they have done, and both to agree and disagree with what they've got already. But I like the idea of having a conformance program and things like that, because you've got to look at, how do you, do two people always have to access the cage? Do you have processes in place like that? How do you track the changes that happen to your build system? There's a whole lot that goes into it. And that's probably way beyond what we'll talk about here. But yes, you're absolutely right. Actually getting into the details of what does that mean is hard. And I only really know how hard it is because at SUSE, we've had to meet all of that to meet Common Criteria 4+. And to get there, I learned, holy smokes, what's involved in that. But I would like to see more build systems kind of go up that level of what you need with access controls and all of that stuff, because I think that'll help make everything more secure. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, thanks for raising your concerns. This is precisely the stuff that we need to know. So appreciate it. I just wanted to second the points raised earlier that yes, not everything here is going to be easily cryptographically verifiable, right? Intodo can help to some extent to that, but that's probably why we came up with the idea of a conformance program, to have human third-party auditors to tell you, okay, we really did do the checks, but to do that in the first place, like Michael was alluding to earlier, we need a more objective set of criteria to be able to check those claims. I think I'll end with the note that I think while it's important to check build security, this is precisely the sort of thing that Intodo is supposed to help with in the first place, is that to a very large extent, not strictly true, but to a very large extent, you can get away with not fully trusting the build service in the first place, because you can always verify it to some extent. Not completely true. If you don't have things like reproducible builds, it's going to be hard to double check whether the build is correct. But if you have things like reproducible builds, you could double check the attestations from 2 different builds to see, okay, they match up even though I don't fully trust them. So.
Yes, and so reproducible builds makes a big difference there, because you're going to have different build systems by different organizations. For most things in open source, though, you're not going to end up with that, because you're not going to have multiple builds. I'm not going to take a CNCF project over here and say, okay, we've got it in 2 build systems. You can trust both build systems haven't been compromised. Look, they've got the same hash. You're not going to end up with that kind of facility there. And so, you know, part of this is also what's practically going to happen and how do you communicate it with people? Because it's great to have like an organization come in, vet your build system processes and all of this, and maybe attest to it in a way that can be grabbed. But then now you've got something that's not really easily human parsable. You can't see it as a glance. And that's another characteristic of all of this, of how do you communicate this? So there's the security and the usability that I'd like to see taken into account.
Exactly. Thanks. Before I'll just make a quick point before I pass the mic to Mark. Yes, I'm glad you spelled out explicitly something I was thinking about, but I think everyone thinks about it, but nobody really says it out loud. I think the build security, being able to measure your build security somehow is a very nice way. It's a trade-off between the complexity of reproducible builds, which even if you could do it, you may not always be able to achieve it in the real world, especially open source projects, like you said. So yeah, that's where the build security really shines, to be able to measure it somehow.
I'm trying to think about like practical next steps of what is achievable before the 1.0 release. The intention was that, like, almost the intention is like, this is a really hard problem to define what the security requirements are, and deferring it all the way to SLSA 4 is like kind of too late. And so we're kind of like throwing our hands up in the air and saying, instead of defining levels, we have this guidance around verifying systems of like, here's the type of approach that one might take when choosing whether it's good enough or not, which it's not very satisfying. It doesn't have the gamification approach that you mentioned. Do you have any recommendations for kind of how to take what we have now and kind of improve it a bit without like completely writing something new?
The only thing I can do is a minor addendum, which is to note something into the future section. So that way you communicate that it hasn't been dropped, but it is something we're considering moving forward, just as part of the communications. Beyond that, if I had something simpler, I probably would have filed an issue the idea, and I haven't come up with anything simpler. If somebody else has one, I would love to hear it. Just in my own creative abilities, just didn't come up with anything. Chris, did you have something to say?
Maybe we could rebrand the verifying build systems page to a draft of a build track. Is that helpful?
I think someone else also brought up a similar thing, and we've talked in previous meetings about that. We kind of have this conflict of, we want to define like the stable parts of the spec of like, here's the requirements and we don't think they're going to change, and we're kind of confident that when we say this means SLSA build level 3, that like that will continue in the future. But we also want to give an indication of, here's a bunch of things that are good to do. We have not yet formulated them into levels, like two-party review, retaining code, hermetic builds, identifying commits or signing commits or something like that, pinning dependencies, the way that you run the build system, et cetera. We could kind of throw more things on future directions, but we could kind of rephrase it. Instead of like a future directions, there might be a future SLSA build track or source track, or I'm sorry, I forget what you called it, Matt. Like operations track or something. Kind of be more specific around like, here's things that are probably good to do, and whether or not they are part of a level, like you're not going to go wrong doing it because it's good advice. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, and the other side is the consumers of the build systems, right? So I was thinking of both the producers and the consumers of the system. You need to communicate to the consumers what's going on. We're trying to kind of push the builders and operators of those systems to improve their security. Also convey to the consumers of those systems where they're at in an easy to do manner. That's why I came up with the idea of build systems levels. I was building on your idea of levels, and you did the build levels, and then you talked about the, what was it, source levels coming in the future, or some kind of source track. And I thought, you know, build systems is another area you could also, you know, trackify, so to speak, with levels that communicate to end users and criteria at those levels, which would kind of entice people who build and operate those systems to meet that, and then convey that in a very easy to see manner. But it is more work than you'll get done before a 1.0. And I totally realize that.
So given the timelines of, like, we want to basically get the whole thing approved next Monday, which means that I think we probably need a pull request like within the next, probably by Wednesday, I think, sent out for review by Wednesday to actually get it approved and merged by the end of the week. And so the specific recommendation here is to note, at least on the future directions, I don't know if maybe elsewhere on the site, like the requirements page or the verifying systems page, but at least on the future directions page, this, and also in the what's new, which I'm writing now, and the announcement. So should we use this existing issue to track that? And do we have any volunteers to write that?
I'm the kind of person, if I propose something, I'm willing to write for it, but I also probably don't know all the right places to write it. So if somebody else has a better idea, I'm more than happy to do it. I fear if I did it, even if I wrote it today, the back and forth might go beyond Wednesday because somebody pointing out someplace else I need to do something. But I am willing to do it if nobody else is up for it.
Yeah, I think, I mean, if the alternative is like that, or like we don't have anything, it seems like a strict improvement to add it to some places, even if we don't have it like every place, that would be optimal. Starting with your idea of adding it to the future directions, I'd be fine adding something there, you know, like another track page. And if we just start there, that's at least noting that these are the types of things that we're thinking about. Like, we don't yet know how we would make a track, or even if we would necessarily have a track for this, but these are the types of things that we would think about. And then maybe point to the verifying systems page to talk about, like, you know, the approach to looking at that. And if you, certainly if you have any guidance on the verifying systems page, that would be welcome to.
Okay. Yeah, if you want, I can make a pull request like that and try to get something in today or tomorrow morning for you, if that would work. Unless you want to do it, just tell me. No, I'm good being a flunky here.
That would be, pull requests are very welcome. Any concerns on the 2-week review period? This is our topic that anytime we talk about this. No concerns? Okay, I see Arna shaking his head.
No, I mean, this is future. I mean, it was just, it's indicative, it's informative at this point. It's not even nobody's part of the spec. So we can say whatever. We should be careful, you know, as always for this kind of stuff, we don't want to commit to anything. So it really has to be worded into, hey, this is the kind of things we're thinking about, you know, but this is what I think is intended. So I think that's cool. Good.
One final thing there, I think it's on. I also agree with Arno. I don't think it's given that it's all future stuff. I don't think it makes it part of the actual spec. But I do think I'd be curious to know if folks have thoughts on if folks have thoughts around, like, is rules around the requirements for the build spec. Do we want to mostly, like, there's a lot of content out there already on that, right? Like when it comes to, let's say, the the build provenance, right? There's not a lot of content outside of SLSA on that kind of really focused on that piece. But when it comes to sort of secure build infrastructure, there is stuff like the, you know, the white paper that came out of the CNCF, the secure software factory reference architecture, and you know, and some other things, like there's the OWASP, there's some stuff that came out of OWASP and some stuff that came out of NIST SSDF. Do we want to, as much as we can, like focus on like just referring to those things, or do you think that, or do folks think that like there's actually enough that we're doing that it warrants like a separate set of requirements that we ourselves define?
So I'll jump on this. I think it does warrant a separate set of requirements because SLSA, like a couple of others, does one thing really well. They gamify it at a glance, right? Which pushes people to try for higher levels, more levels to improve on it. Reading the, you know, CNCF paper on this, it's wonderful. How do I know if anybody's done it? How do I know if somebody's done it without a significant amount of research? And even then, can I tell? Being able to assess it as an end user and to be able to do that fairly quickly is so useful. And there isn't a lot of that out there. Well, there's a lot of guidance out there on what you should do. That's great for operators of it. But if you're a consumer trying to figure out how an operator's doing, I sort of trust you, I hope. And if there's a way to communicate and convey some of this, I think it would be great. And I know there's some other specifications out there that do some of this, but they're more niche and a lot of people don't know about them, which is an opportunity for SLSA.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. And like I said, I'll keep an eye out for your PR. You're holding you to it now.
I've done this enough time to other people. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This is always great to have someone who shows up to the first meeting kick off like a pretty solid half-hour discussion. So thanks a lot. All the better to promise to send a PR. All right, I think we're out of time. Thanks everyone for joining. As always, I appreciate everyone contributing. And we will, again, please look out for pull requests. We had mentioned as a reminder up in the meeting notes, pull requests 8.10 and 8.15 are out for 8.16 rather out for review now. If anyone is willing to take 8.15, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll find someone to do it, but certainly it's better if someone volunteers. And I will send out a what's new pull request, let's say tomorrow morning. Okie doke. All right, thanks everyone. See you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.